Hello and welcome, dear viewers, in our new meeting, our new interview. For today, our guest is political history specialist, culture expert, in one word, YouTuber André Dutra. Hello and welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. So let's start with something really easy about your content, about your YouTube channel. So majority of your content on your YouTube channel is about the politics, about the culture of the American stuff. But in some the most recent videos, we can see some about the UK election, maybe about the Brazil. So let us know. Let know our viewers about.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. My area of focus has largely been in American history, as you said, partly because that's just the sort of stuff that's attracted me the most. If you've seen my Brazil video, I'm actually originally from Brazil, though I don't know nearly as much about their political system. And I've always wanted to branch out a little bit and talk about different countries, but I don't know, American history and American politics is always just so compelling, and I feel that I guess it was easier to get really good at one thing and to like focus there and get very knowledgeable and very comfortable there before branching out. But I would love to talk about other countries and I would love to learn more about their history. It's like the more history that you learn, the more that there is to learn in general. So that's always exciting.
I can completely feel you, man, because I'm originally from Poland in Europe, but I really love the US history and talk about US politicians, presidents. I'm not sure if you've ever seen about that, but in our YouTube channel, we actually make the tier list about US president, every each of them. So it's pretty
That's
exciting
awesome.
for me. And I can't wait to see similar stuff on your YouTube channel.
Yeah, I struggle with tier lists honestly because I focus so much on the character aspects of it, like the personal history, that I end up kind of like I end up since I have so much more of a focus on them as people, like what motivates them, why they make the decisions that they make, that I almost like forget about that other dimension because I'm so busy looking at like the leadership qualities and stuff like that.
Like the psychological portraits. Am I right?
Yeah, a little bit. Just because I feel like we don't examine that as much anymore. Like there's the whole idea of great man history that people are very dismissive of. And while I think those critiques are valid to a certain extent, I think we've sort of overcorrected and we don't look at the individual enough to the point where like
Mhm.
I don't know, you have a lot of people in the United States that support someone that will support someone, let's say like Bernie Sanders, just off of
Mhm.
policy, right? Like Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden, you're just like more personally moderate. But then you also have to examine like what decisions is Joe Biden going to make in the White House? Like what personal qualities about Joe Biden are there that would affect the way he makes decisions? Like there's like stubbornness, is there age, is there any level of things there that can vary that I feel we don't pay attention to. So that's sort of where my area of focus has been.
I agree with that. Even President Kennedy, I'm not sure if you ever heard about it, but President Kennedy once said, "You can judge any single of the presidents, even James Buchanan, even many, but you should judge him because he had his own history, his own motivation to do some stuff what he did."
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because I've been reading so many political biographies, and the number one takeaway is that these are just people. Like we tend to
Hmm.
romanticize them and look at them as like these giants of history, but when you think about it, they were just human beings like you and me. And honestly, like the people that go into politics, like sometimes they can be like really special and really talented, but for the most part, they're just regular, and they're the people that kind of ended up being at the right place or the right time under the right circumstances. So you shouldn't look at them as like these amazing, like heroic figures. You should look at them as what they are, just regular people with regular motivations.
Exactly. But every each of person has his own favorite president. Who is your one?
Ooh, favorite pre. Oh, I
I know
feel
it's a
like
tough one, but it's gonna be
okay.
very
I feel
interesting.
like I always do a cop out on this one because I have a hard time deciding a favorite president. Right, like the best president is what you mean by that. Like
No, your favorite one, not the
ah,
best.
okay. I'll say I think the most interesting president. I'll say like my favorite president to learn about is Lyndon Johnson. I think
Oh, yeah.
Lyndon Johnson is so incredibly fascinating. I've mentioned it a million times on my channel, but you can see behind me here like the Robert Caro series, The Years of Lyndon
Yeah.
Johnson is incredible. It's this like huge 4 volume biography about him and just like the sheer ambition, the sheer I guess willingness to go all the way, the mastery of power and the ability to sort of execute policy on a level that other people can't. You know, like I mentioned before, politicians are just people for the most part. But then you look at someone like Lyndon Johnson, and you're like, no, this is an animal. This is a force
Mhm.
of nature. You know, in a way that almost no other president was, in my opinion. LBJ just was this fascinating character, and even if he's not the best president in American history, which I don't think he is, I think that he's the one that I find myself going back to the most often.
I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm a bit surprised because I was expecting someone like Richard Nixon. Because I saw in many of your videos that you are really, really fascinated by this person.
Really, Richard Nixon's really interesting as well, and him and Lyndon Johnson are similar in a lot of regards in terms of their paranoia, in terms of like them both coming up from very poor backgrounds and sort of looking down on JFK, for example, and other rich people like that. I actually in my video about Nixon, I talk about the Nixon Johnson similarities and how they both
Mhm.
sort of were afraid of JFK and then later of Bobby Kennedy coming back and sort of like reclaiming the Kennedy mantle. And Nixon is very interesting as well, but I'd say that I find LBJ a little more personally interesting myself just because of the legislative record there. Like I feel like looking like Nixon was mostly a foreign policy president. And I think Richard Nixon himself would have agreed with that characterization. But Lyndon Johnson, just like the his ability to work the Senate, this slow moving machine that was literally meant to stop progress and make it just work at his command to his force of will is fascinating.
Mhm. Oh, yeah, that's very interesting. So let's talk a bit about Nixon, about his foreign policy. Just before 1968 election, I already sent you that question, so I'm gonna ask you because it's very, very interesting. So there are some people who argue, they give them some evidences or proofs that the candidate for the White House, Richard Nixon, sabotaged the ceasefire treaty with North at this point. So, but the fact is that Southern Vietnam actually didn't agree for the ceasefire with the North Vietnam just one day before the election. What do you think about it?
I think that there is a good bit of evidence that shows that Richard Nixon at least acted in a very morally questionable way. Like, regardless of the effect that he had, I think you can see the intention is there. And just his campaign going. I mean, I've seen some people argue that that's actually like worse than Watergate, which I I'm not. See, I feel like I'd have to know more about the specifics of the situation if I'm being completely honest. But I do think that Nixon acted in a way that was at least morally questionable,
Hmm.
personally.
I feel like if that's true, that means that Nixon is more like a person who just wanna take power no matter what. He doesn't look for the morality, for the moral backbone, for the other people, for even human beings. But he just wanted to take power. But
Yeah, I mean, if
for
you look
now,
at it, if
Hmm.
you look at an area where there's a little more concrete evidence, for example, in Richard Nixon's use of the Southern strategy, like if you look at Nixon's career before 1968, he was actually like very pro civil rights, and he never had those sort of Southern sympathies. But once it became politically convenient for him, he sort of was talking about the silent majority and
Hmm.
using the Southern strategy to appeal to certain like racial tensions and racial feelings that white Americans were having towards Black Americans at the time. And I think that it's unquestionable that Richard Nixon sort of capitalized on that backlash. So in that respect, I wouldn't exactly put it past Richard Nixon to do something morally dubious in exchange for political gain.
He's some kind of an opportunist, let's say.
Oh, I mean, I think all politicians are opportunists. I wouldn't I wouldn't knock that use that as a specific knock against Nixon per se, but I do think that like you could look at Lyndon Johnson, for example, was someone who hid his true feelings about civil rights his entire career for careerist motives and because that was the way for him to get ahead. And then once he actually was in the seat of power, he came out in support of civil rights and he ended up passing the most comprehensive civil rights legislation in American history. So I
Yeah.
think,
And
I
he
don't know.
was the first Southern president since the Civil War.
Yeah, and
The
he
first
wouldn't
Southern
have.
president from the Democratic Party, of course.
Yeah, no, I have a video about that called The Civil Rights President, where it
Mm.
talks about it talks a lot about how Lyndon Johnson was a sort of wolf in sheep's clothing to the Southern
Mm.
Bulls because they really wanted him to be their guy, and they always supported him throughout his career. They propped him up for the presidency, and they really were like his patrons. They were his sponsors his entire life, his best friends. And then he gets to the presidency after JFK dies, of course. In his first speech, he says, "Nothing will better honor John F. Kennedy's memory than the passage of the Civil Rights Bill." And all of the
Oh.
Southern Bulls in the first row, watching the speech, their hearts just sank, and they're like, "What is going on?"
Oh.
And I don't know, it's really interesting because and that's another reason why I think Lyndon Johnson is so particularly fascinating is just that sheer ability to early well because I know a bit more about Lyndon Johnson than I do about Richard
Mm.
Nixon. In Lyndon Johnson's world, just his sheer ability to change his mind like
Mm.
this is something that can be done today, but if you look at his entire life, he basically agreed with whoever he was speaking to. Like if I said this and you disagreed with me, LBJ would agree to both of us to our faces, you know. And that's just the sort of politician that he was and the way that he used to get ahead. And I think that Richard Nixon, while not as much of a chameleon, like being from that similar sort of era, it was just like I think it was a little easy to be politically opportunist just because there wasn't the sheer amount of proof that there is today. Like you don't get people on video and on TV all the time and on social media. So contradicting yourself wasn't as big of a deal.
Yeah, but actually, the next Democratic president, Jimmy Carter, was honest. You have to admit that.
He was honest to a fault. He was a little too honest and ended up being really
That's why he
bad for
lost.
him. Yeah, I mean, with in my Jimmy Carter video, I thought it was really fascinating. The more that I learned about Jimmy Carter, the more frustrated that I got because he was this person who's very likable, this person who you're really rooting for. But then you see he was just so um fundamentally, like in terms of his temperament and his personality, not fit for the presidency. You know, like he was an engineer, he wasn't very ideological, and he looked at things based off of data. But he also, for that reason, he would get frustrated when people didn't agree with his data and they were more so on thinking about like the personal aspect or leadership aspects. Like he didn't like schmoozing with members of Congress. He didn't like just hanging out with them and having a drink. So the members of Congress weren't really as fond of him, and he didn't build up the necessary relationships that he had to have. And when he's talking to the American people, instead of, like, say what you want about Ronald Reagan knew how to inspire people. Ronald Reagan knew how to get people on his side. If you have Jimmy Carter saying, there's a crisis of confidence, and Americans, we have been failing each other, and we as a country need to do better because we're responsible for our own problems. Even if that was true, that's not necessarily what the American people want to hear. The American people want to hear this joyful message of a more positive politics, a more hopeful future that Jimmy Carter, through his honesty, which while personally admirable, just wasn't necessarily the right fit to meet that political moment.
Yeah, there was even one meme what I've seen some time ago. It was about 19 Carter versus Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan was like a kill those bastards, while Jimmy Carter was, oh, we have to look at the data, we have to analyze everything. So yeah, I
Yeah.
can feel that, and it was overwhelming victory for Reagan. Spoiler
Yeah.
alert.
It's so funny because I'm someone who was really attracted to the idea of a political outsider, right? I think like it's attractive to a lot of people. But the more that I learned about the presidency, the more that I realized that if you take an outsider like Jimmy Carter, or even we've had outsider presidents in one way or another now for a really long time, like Jimmy Carter was this governor from a southern state. Ronald Reagan had been an actor before he was governor. If you look at Bill Clinton, also governor from a small state, never worked in Washington. George Bush, governor of a state, never worked in Washington. Obama was only a senator for 3 or 4 years before becoming president. Donald Trump, no political experience. Like you look at these guys, and they didn't actually know how to work within the Washington machine. And I think that part of the reason the United States is so polarized today is because we have lived in outsider politics for the better part of 50 years now, and we sort of got to the ultimate conclusion of that, which was the biggest political outsider of them all, with Donald Trump. And if you look at that all starts with Jimmy Carter, and it starts with him not speaking to members of Congress. It speaks to him like getting frustrated with the American people because he doesn't really know how to talk to them. And I don't know. It's interesting when you frame American politics like that through the lens of our last couple leaders not having the same legislative experience as like a Richard Nixon or a Lyndon Johnson or even a John F. Kennedy.
That's very interesting. I'm gonna ask you a bit more about the political polarization in nowadays society. So many people just ask, "Oh, it's very hot temperature. Never been in the whole history that hot as it is right now." So is that true? Actually,
No, I think that there's no possible way that we could be true. That could be true. The American Civil War, we had people like brother killing brother. We split into two. 1960s, we had constant like political assassinations. There was so much strife. I don't think we're anywhere near even like the level of polarization that we had during the 1960s. I do think that we have a sort of unique sort of polarization now because of technology and because of social media, of course. And if anything, I think that the problem today is that politics is just a little too constant. Like politics is entertainment now. It's on your Twitter feed. It's on your Instagram. People wear T-shirts and bumper stickers and flags and all these things. Like I don't know what the politics is like in Poland, but here, like if I drive to work, it's like a 30-minute commute, and if I'm driving to work, I see like Trump flags and pickup trucks with like big Trump things on it. I would even see I live in a very Brazilian area. I would see Bolsonaro bumper stickers and like
whoa,
Bolsonaro stuff.
seriously?
Yeah. No, I live in a super, super Brazilian community. So I would see even stuff like that. And it's really funny because it's just constantly around you. And I think if you look at there's even the memes about like Thanksgiving sucks because people start talking about politics and it's the stuff like that. It's just everywhere. It in a very annoying way, I guess. Even as like it's funny because most of my friends don't really care about history, or they at least pay less attention to politics than I do. And I've had multiple people text me within the last month, since last month was so crazy. They'll be like, "Hey, Andre, what's going on? Like, what's happening?" I actually have a friend who's his family's from Poland, and
Oh,
he was spending a month there now while all this while all the craziness was happening. And he was like, "Dude, I haven't heard about American politics in so long, and then the Trump assassination happened. What's going on?" And I was like, "Dude, you're gonna come back to a really weird country." Like, I don't know, a
I'm
lot
a bit
has changed.
scared because I'm also spending some time in Poland and I'm going back to the US in next few months, so it's
Oh,
gonna be
really? Nice.
crazy. Yeah, yeah. But can I ask you, what state are you from?
I'm from Florida.
Oh, cool. That's cool. I'm stated in South Carolina, so it's pretty close.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I spent New Year's there this year.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, I
That's
went
very great
to
to hear.
Columbia.
I'm near to Greenville, so it's the other part of the state.
Ah, hmm.
Yeah. So that's nothing the most important, but I just wanted to ask you.
Yeah, no worries.
So let us continue. Mm, Oh yeah, let's talk about more controversies about the election, about the polarization. For me, the most polarized election was Hayes against Tilden. It was in 19th century. I'm not sure if you are familiar with this one, but for me, that's just my subjective opinion. But for me, this election was rigged, actually.
Okay.
But let us talk about something more hot for now.
Okay.
The great controversy of the election of the year 2000, where Bush
Oh,
slightly won Florida, your state, slightly
yeah.
against Al Gore, vice president at this time. So, what do you think about it?
Ooh, it's funny. I wanted to make a video about that
Oh,
because
seriously?
I not only was it Florida, it was a sort of it was Palm Beach and Broward, the Miami metro area, which is like exactly where I'm located. So it was
Whoa.
right here. And I wanted to go around and sort of see if I could talk to like poll workers that had worked that day or something. That was the sort of idea that I had that I hadn't gotten around to working on yet. But as far as as the actual election goes, man, it's a tough one because when you look at the oh my god, the hanging chads and everything, that's such a funny election to learn about. But God, the Supreme Court having to get involved. First of all, that's just so crazy. The idea of that existing. Oh my god, if that happened today, I feel like it would be so much worse because the 90s, you were coming off such a stable period in American politics, right? Like a period of prosperity, and it was this sort of like chill political moment. Like it was a controversial thing, but I feel like it happened at a relatively calm time, right? As far as the credibility of it, I think that hmm, conservative Supreme Court at the time and Jeb Bush being governor of Florida,
Brother of the George W.
the
Bush,
one of the George
the
W. Bush's
candidate.
brother gave him a significant advantage. And when you come down to the fact that the entire election was decided by what was it, 520 votes, I believe, in
Something
Florida.
like that.
Yeah, like 500 and something votes in Florida. It's fishy. It's fishy, right? Like I don't want to walk around saying like stolen election or like anything like that. But I do think and it was just so I meant like Al Gore could have gone about it better because he conceded and then he called back to unconcede
Hmm.
and he was sort of being perceived as a sore loser. Oh, I think that I say if they kept counting, it might have been Al Gore. I think it probably would have been Al Gore if they kept counting. I'll be honest with you, but I wasn't alive at the time, and I've only like I haven't given as much thought and as much research to that as I would like to be able to say like completely comfortably. It's I try to not be certain about anything that I don't know for certain, right? But
Okay.
I'll say I do think that there was some very fishy stuff going on there, and that they should have at least kept voting, and they shouldn't have stopped counting.
Okay, that's very interesting. And at this point, Florida was the closest state in the country for about 12 years, let's say.
Yeah,
Since
Florida only recently kind of stopped being a swing state, which is very weird.
hmm for now, some people even say that Florida gonna be more red than Texas. Do you agree with that?
Um,
More
I don't know
Republican.
about more red than Texas. I think that'll take some time. I do think it's funny because I have a friend who wants to be a politician, and he lived here in Florida, but then he was originally from North Carolina, and he moved back there. And well, I was joking with him. I was like, "Hey, you have more of a future as like a Democratic politician in North Carolina than you do in Florida." But also, Florida's Democratic Party is just kind of a mess. Honestly, like it's not very well run in my opinion, and it's a lot of like sort of like older faces that don't meet the current political moment as much, like Debbie Wasserman Schultz or Lois Frankel, that have a lot of power in our political system, and it's not really the sort of like the energy that I think would be able to appeal to like more blue Florida voters. I mean, if you look at 2018, Andrew Gillum just barely lost the governorship. It was almost Ron DeSantis and Gillum, I think, were within a point of each other in
Even
2018.
less, I think. A
Yeah,
half of the percentage point.
it
But the
was
similar stuff happened in Texas in the said elect the Senate in 2018, as you remember. Mr. Corbyn almost lost to Beto O'Rourke, as I remember at this point. It
oh,
was
I think you're thinking of Ted Cruz for the Senate.
Ted Cruz. Yeah, you're right. Sorry about that, but it was
Oh,
very
no.
close at this point.
How close was the 2018 Texas Senate election? Actually, I'm gonna look that up.
It was about 1 percentage point or even less.
It got that close.
Yeah,
It
it
was
was that close. It was that close. I
yeah,
was
it was
also
a
actually very surprised at this point, but yeah.
yeah, it was a point and a half. It was 50.89 for Cruz and 48.33 for O'Rourke. That's so weird. I didn't know it was that close. I was
hmm
how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 24 for now.
24. Okay, you're a year
hmm
older than me. I'm 23.
Oh,
So
cool.
I was still pretty young, and I wasn't following politics as closely as I am right now.
And also, what is very important that Ted Cruz at this point was very famous figure around the country.
He had just
So
lost the presidential primary.
yeah, he was the second one in the race. So it was very massive at this point. So let us talk about the prediction of the future elections. So what do you think about election by Mr. Alan Lickman theory?
Oh,
Let us talk about it about this
man, the
issue.
13 keys. 13
Yeah,
keys.
exactly. What
I'm
is
not
it in
really a
general?
fan.
Uh-huh.
Well, okay, so the 13 keys, more or less, if I'm correct, is looking at like certain characteristics and traits in American elections that Alan Lickman theorizes are supposed to predict the outcome. Like not really to look as much at polling necessarily, more so to just look at the criteria that he laid out, which I personally just don't really agree with very much at all. I think that man, Mr. Beat did a really good thing talking about this, and I think he said he's going to talk to Alan Lickman this year as well. So I'm excited for that conversation. But I don't know. I don't give it much credit because I feel like it's I think I saw someone on Reddit once say that it's really easy to look at elections that happen and try to find stuff in common and ascribe a meaning to it in retrospect. But as far as predicting elections go, I don't know. I find it hard to buy into, but I'd be curious to hear your opinion of it actually.
Oh, that's a bit surprising for me. It's a very tough question, to be honest, because actually it worked for about 12 elections
Mm.
since Ronald Reagan's second term. only the one election when he actually lost. It was Al Gore, the great controversy of the year 2000. So it's really a tough one. It's a very tough question, but actually a lot of people argue that it's not true. Even I'm not sure if you are familiar with the web page 538. It's
Mhm.
for now
Yeah.
the part of ABC News, but
Mhm.
their chief redactor just said a few times even that he completely disagree with this idea. But Professor Alan Lickman actually sent him letter back. Oh, I'm arguing this is true because, and it was about 50 pages long. So,
Yeah,
and
once
his
you
boss didn't answer to him. So it is very, very crazy. But it actually worked. I mean, the official party in the White House have to have five false issues at this point. It's like a growing economy or the scandal or, for example, social unrest. And they have to have at least five for false to lose the election.
Mhm.
So for now, it's about to be very, very tough because the Democratic Party has at least three negative, and two of them are very likely to be negative as well. So this election is predicted to be very close based on this theory of Alan Lickman. But
Y-
we shall see, to
yeah,
be honest.
I don't know this. Well, because this election in particular is just so crazy, right? Like we've never had a candidate that dropped out so close to the election date, a whole new nominee, assassination attempt that no one's even talking about, even though it happened like probably what a month ago now, maybe a little
Even
less.
less, even like a
Yeah,
3 weeks. Mm-hmm.
no, it feels like forever ago, and just like the I don't know. It's just been such an insane scenario. You have Trump with his like criminal charges and everything. There's so many unprecedented factors that I feel like if I was in the election prediction game, which I certainly am not, this would be the election that I would be the most worried about. Number one, because it's like the most toss up of toss up at the moment. I feel like it could really go either way. And because of just all the craziness that's happened, and we're still what we're 3 months out from election day. Yeah, so there's still a lot of crazy stuff that could happen. Just in the last month alone, the dynamics of American politics have flipped completely on their head, and it's insane to think that in a world where that's possible, we can try to predict the election from so far out.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that the October surprise gonna come this year?
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's always an October surprise, right? I'm scared because it's like, what's the October surprise gonna be? I feel like it's been pretty bad so far, you know.
Mm-hmm. It
Though
was indeed.
I wanted to do a live stream about this because I'm so confused by what's going on with Trump right now. Like he has not known what to do against Harris. This is like the most mistakes I've seen him make in his entire political career. I don't know what's going on with him. He's completely off his game in a very weird way.
You think?
Yeah,
What is happening then?
I don't know. I don't honestly. I wonder if the assassination attempt might have just shook him up a little bit. And the assassination attempt happened, and then Biden dropped out. Well, because if you think about it, if you're Trump, you had this layup election, right? Like you were gonna win in a landslide, and then suddenly you're not running against the same guy anymore, who you spent millions of dollars, like hundreds of millions of dollars, campaigning against, who you've been running against pretty much since he became president 4 years ago, who you had a whole debate against. You had a whole Republican convention that was attacking this man. Like from his perspective, it's like the ground just got ripped out from under you, and he's still running against Joe Biden. He's talking about Joe Biden right now more than he's talking about Kamala. And it's really weird. But it's also like he's an old man, and he did almost get killed very, very recently. And I don't know. I think that for the first time in his presidential career, Trump looks weak. It's weird. It's weird how weak he looks right now because he's always been like so robust. Like him or not, he's always been very charismatic, and I don't think I've ever seen him as far off his game as he is at the moment, which is weird.
Whoa, that's crazy. That's very, very strong issue for now, for him, for the Republican Party in general. I wonder how it's going to continue to be. I wonder how the Democratic Convention gonna look like. Are they going to vote for Harris, or actually they're gonna switch their votes for someone else? Maybe we don't know
Oh
for now.
no, it's got to be it's Harris.
You
She has
think?
a majority of the delegates. She has enough delegates to get nominated. So they I don't think they could really do much about it, right? And also,
But
there's
they
just such
actually can
popular.
vote. They can decide in their own because they were about to vote for Biden. But for now, they can vote in their own
Yeah, but
way of thinking.
I don't. They're not gonna do that though. There's so much popular support around Harris and the Democratic Party, and she's having such a moment right now compared to Trump that would be, and it would also just add to a further image of chaos. It'd be like, okay, we had this one candidate, we got rid of him. That's okay. People don't really care. They like what we did so far, and now we're gonna get rid of her. I don't think that makes sense politically. I don't think they would do that.
You think? I think it's just like a good momentum for now, but for the future, it can be a bit problematic for Harris because some
I don't.
problems can come. For example, from the past, some scandals,
I
like
don't
she was
know.
the in the California Senate or other issues would happen to her during her very long political career.
I don't know. I don't. I mean, any politician would have those sort of like potential for scandals. I don't know. I don't think I see them switching Harris out at all, and I haven't seen much sentiment around that
Hmm,
online or
that's
in
actually.
conversation with anyone.
That's actually very interesting. So we are going to observe and monitor very, very closely upcoming election. We know for sure that it is going to be very, very interesting
Hmm.
for all of the people who like politics in the United States. So let me ask you about some of the history, about the Great Switch theory. Do you agree with this theory, which argues that Democrats and Republicans flipped their ideologies in 60s or 70s?
I'd say that. Okay, so number one, I wouldn't say they flipped their entire ideology, and number two, I don't think it happened just in the '60s or '70s. Like, as I'm sure you know, like before, in the start of the 20th century, let's say, the Republican and Democratic Party both had conservative and liberal wings within, right? You had conservative Democrats, liberal Democrats, conservative Republicans, liberal Republicans. And if you look at Franklin Roosevelt, for example, like the Republican Party, obviously Abraham Lincoln, free the slaves, they had a large majority of the black vote for a long time. But then, as to my understanding, as Franklin Roosevelt became president, New Deal programs, all that stuff happening, Black Americans started to become more swing voters. It started to be not so much so that they were certain to go to the Republican Party, but they might go Democrat, they might go Republican. And Franklin Roosevelt had the New Deal coalition, which united a bunch of like Southern rural Democrats in the in the Southern rural white Democrats in the South, white Democrats in the North, Black Americans, and they had the New Deal coalition, which was a very powerful like governing force that allowed Franklin Roosevelt to stay in office for a really long time and establish the New Deal consensus. So you had Dwight Eisenhower, who even though he was a Republican, he governed like more liberally than another Republican president from another time would have. And as the parties sort of realigned based off race, because well, we hadn't elected a Southern Democrat as the head of the party in a really long time. So by the time that we get John F. Kennedy, there's a lot of splits there. There's a lot of concerns that this Northerner is too liberal for the South, that he's not going to carry the same civil rights interest, like the same anti-civil rights agenda that's so valuable to them. That way, Lyndon Johnson balances out the ticket by being a Southerner and someone who, in theory, would be anti-civil rights, right? And would appeal to those Southern voters. But then John F. Kennedy, of course, dies. Lyndon Johnson loses the South in his big re-election bid to George Wallace. who carries the Deep South since Lyndon Johnson's doing his civil rights policies, his civil rights legislation. And from there on out, the sort of reliable farm vote, the reliable white working class rural voter in the South felt disaffected by the Democratic Party, felt left behind by the Democratic Party. And that's where Richard Nixon's Southern strategy that I mentioned earlier comes in, where you pick up a lot of those disaffected, disgruntled, working class white voters that used to vote reliably Democrat, and that instead went into the Republican Party as the Republican Party became the party of conservatism and more so embraced the racial backlash following the civil rights era.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Some people even say that the year when this happened, let's say that when black people changed their minds, was the nomination for the Republican Party for the president for the Barry Goldwater. It was in 1964.
Yeah,
it was the first time when the Deep South voted Republican in the whole history.
Well, the Deep South, it didn't go for Goldwater that election. It went for Wallace, correct?
No, it was 1964, not 68.
Really?
In 68, they voted for Wallace. That's true.
Okay,
That's
my
true.
bad.
But yeah, even Storm Thurmond, the senator from the South Carolina, my state, so I have to know that he supported Goldwater, and that was the tipping point, let's say. But let me give you some numbers. In the election of 1960, 32% of black Americans voted Republican for Nixon. In 1968, only 8% voted for Nixon. It was the same person. So, I mean, maybe it wasn't a tipping point, but something happened during the 60s or late 50s, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's Lyndon Johnson's support for civil rights legislation, 100%. And it's Richard Nixon changing his mind about civil rights issues and embracing the sort of the white flight from the Democratic Party and taking advantage of that silent majority of voters. I mean, that's when we sort of realign to the coalitions that we have today, where the Democratic Party is the party of more of minority voters and some white voters as well, and the Republican Party is the party of white voters for the most part. I mean, that's just the way that we ended up divided. For a long time, the Democrats were seen as the party of the working class, and Republicans more so the party of the business class. But that's something that's also been changing a little bit as more college educated voters go to the Democrats and more working class white voters go Republican. I mean, if you look at it, Obama won Iowa. That's crazy. Obama, that is a very deep red state right now. There's no world in where Iowa is a swing state. So it's interesting to see the ways that our politics can change in such a short amount of time. And I know that a lot of people, particularly on the right, are interested in the idea of minority voters, at least or of minority voters being more interested in the Republican Party now than there used to be, and it sort of being more about whether or not you went to college. Sometimes it could be along gender divides. I know men and women overwhelmingly, men go to the Republican Party, women go to the Democratic Party, and that's going to be really interesting for our society and how much people date and get married and stuff. But I don't know. There's lots of realignments happening all the time, and I'd love to see where we're going.
Mm-hmm. For sure, we know that it's going to be very interesting, but very tough for the society. I saw one poll where overwhelming majority of young women actually is leaning very far left, and overwhelming majority of young men is leaning far right. So it's going to be really tough for the relationship in some point.
Yeah, I mean, as I mean, I think that it depends on certain issues. The parties are just going to have to evolve a little bit. And I think we've been stuck in an old sort of politics for a really long time. And I think Trump was sort of like the first crack in that, right? And we don't know what a post-Trump political world looks like. Like if you look at Biden, Biden's been a little more hawkish on China than he probably would have been in a world without Donald Trump. Biden's been a little, at least rhetoric-wise, he's been tougher on immigration than he probably would have been in a world without Donald Trump. These sort of changing sentiments and changing consensus, it happens all the time. I mean, you even saw Trump was saying no tax on tips, and then Kamala right after was like, hey, no tax on tips. Mm-hmm. So the two sides, when there's something popular, they don't mind taking it from each other. I mean, I know J.D. Vance and even my Senator Marco Rubio are Republicans, and they're interested in the child tax credit, even if the version of it that they look at isn't the same as something that Democrats would push. I believe they have like work requirements and stuff when the Democrats don't. It's interesting to see stuff like that. And I think that as like if the Republican Party wants to be the party of working class voters through Trump, they're going to have to make some adjustment. And I think that if Democrats also want to try to do better with working class white voters, they're also going to have to make some adjustments.
Mm-hmm. I think so as well. So just for the last question, could you recommend some good books, good podcasts for our viewers who would like to know more about the American politics?
Oh my God, I could recommend you so many books. I do a lot of audiobooks. I really recommend audiobooks to people because it's a lot easier to get through them. Books are wonderful, reading is wonderful, but like sitting down and taking the time to read is a lot more time consuming. And sometimes it's just like I have to drive 30 minutes to my girlfriend's house. I could just throw on a book, and I like after a week of going
with you.
Yeah,
I have to confess something. When firstly I found your YouTube channel, I was tidying my room. So I was just listening the podcast in the background, and I was, whoa, this guy is talking very nice words. So I need to listen to him more.
I'll still answer your question, but what was the first video of mine that you saw? I was wondering.
Probably about Bush Senior, the last politician, as I remember.
Yeah, that's my biggest video. A lot of people found that one.
And I have to admit, it looks very, very professional. So it deserved that views. It has about 400,000 views for now. Something like that.
Quite there. It's 300 and something thousand. It might,
but still pretty close.
I can check for you. Yeah, it's crazy how well it's doing. You know, it's funny. I posted that video at this. I think like November 2nd of last year, and it got like 3,000 views, and that was like one of my biggest videos at the time with 3,000 views. And then it sat there for a really long time, and then in April I posted my Jimmy Carter video, and the Jimmy Carter video did really, really well, and it started getting like tens of thousands of views, and it was my biggest video. Then the last politician after that started picking up. And the last politician ended up like passing the Jimmy Carter video, and now it has like 300,000 views. It's this crazy thing. So, and I always try to tell people that because it's like I made videos on YouTube for almost 2 years before I got like the amount of subscribers and stuff that I have now. Like it was very much like I had 1,000 subscribers, and then like a month passed, and suddenly I had 10,000. And you know,
YouTube algorithm is just crazy.
Yeah, and people like, hey, I have 2 years of videos, and guess what? A lot of people went back and they watched a lot of the videos, and then like it's nice because you do this work, and like sometimes it feels like no one is watching, but after a while, like someone might find it, and you never know. A video that you made like 6 months before might blow up and become like one of your biggest videos. So. But I will answer your book question. I'm so sorry.
You're good.
Well, my little bookshelf is right here behind me. Number one series of books I always recommend, I already mentioned it before, is The Years of Lyndon Johnson by Robert Caro. It's massive. It's bigger than the Bible. Like it's longer than the Christian Bible. And it is like the most in-depth look that you can have into another person, but they are the best political biographies I've ever read. It's probably my favorite book series, and I cannot recommend them enough. If you're anyone who's interested in history, interested in politics, you have to check these books out. I need to get like a Robert Caro sponsorship because I'm always pushing his books. Actually, a special one. My next video is about Bobby Kennedy, and this book, Bobby Kennedy: The Making of a Liberal Icon, by Larry Ty, is wonderful. It helps you understand Bobby Kennedy's ideology and his identity a lot better because he's a sort of contradictory figure in a lot of ways. Like he worked for Joseph McCarthy, and he ended up like as a big
Whoa.
anti-communist, and he ends up being like this big liberal progressive who didn't think that Lyndon Johnson was liberal enough. And it's it's
That's
wonderful.
crazy.
I have a Jimmy Carter, His Very Best about Jimmy Carter by Jonathan Alter is really wonderful. And I think that, well, number one thing in all the books that I recommend is I feel like it teaches you a lot about what it means to be a good president and what it takes to be a good president. Because you have to learn both from the successful ones and the unsuccessful ones. So with what's it called? His Very Best by Jimmy Carter, I think that it shows you how someone with like a very, very intelligent person. Jimmy Carter is probably like the smartest president we've had in like the last 100 years. Can just be fundamentally bad at politics and not have a temperament for politics, right? So it's a very valuable lesson there, and also it's very personally inspiring. Jimmy Carter is a very personally inspiring story, and I think more so than any other book, that one gave me a lot of things that I kept with me in my personal life and that I sort of implemented, which is very nice. I also man, there's so many books to recommend. I'll do two more. Or actually, I'll do three.
Go on, feel free.
JFK, Coming of Age in the American Century by Frederick Logevall is a wonderful book. It focuses on JFK up until the age of 35, I believe. And it's really a book that asks you to forget that JFK became president. Like the most interesting version of JFK is JFK as a young man, you know? Because number one, I tend to think JFK is kind of overrated, right? Like he gets remembered because he was assassinated, and he's sort of romanticized in that way. And a lot of I think look at the other presidents from the 60s, LBJ and Richard Nixon, two presidents that aren't remembered particularly well, right? Like JFK would have been left to fix their messes. Like the same issues that troubled them would have troubled JFK as well. So I think JFK kind of dodged a bullet to make a little bit of a pun. But that book, it shows you what it's like to be a young person in the early 20th century. JFK is born on the eve of World War I, and that's where the book starts. And it talks all about his family background and how JFK was this young person interested in politics, and his dad is ambassador to Great Britain and is this important political player. And JFK gets to like be in the room with all these important people at a super young age, and he gets to tour Europe, and he gets to go to Israel and Palestine and see that stuff firsthand as a teenager. And he's one of the last Americans that visits Nazi Germany before the outbreak of World War II, and he has really interesting observations on it that as a fellow young person that's interested in these things, it's really cool to see that same perspective of someone 100 years ago who got to see those things firsthand. Like, could you imagine? Well, I guess you're pretty close by to Ukraine, but like, could you imagine like being there right now and like getting to see everything firsthand? But obviously on like a bigger scale, as far as World War II goes, it's crazy. And then I'll be a little more short about the next.
Go on, feel free. Take your time.
I made a video about this not that long ago with like book recommendations, and I already have like a bunch of other book recommendations.
Oh, okay, so we're going to put it on the description.
Oh, no worries. What was it? Oh, The Gatekeepers is a really good book about the White House chief of staff, and it goes through the like all of the modern chiefs of staff, and it gives you a sort of intimate knowledge of the inner workings of the White House. And I don't think any other book has showed me more about the day-to-day functions of the president and what it means to actually do the job and do the job well and what it takes. And for the last one, I will recommend the books that I'm reading at the moment. I have them as well. Let me see. Oh, that's funny. I actually have all three of them. This is The Gatekeepers, the book that I just mentioned, actually. And
Oh, great.
these were actually recommended to me on YouTube. Catching the Wind and Against the Wind by Neil Gabler, and these are about Ted Kennedy and his entire career, and they sort of go into they're about Ted Kennedy, but they're also really about the fall of liberalism and how the sort of New Deal consensus fell apart and how conservatism became the majority ideology in the United States. They're giant as well. They're not as big as the LBJ books, but they're pretty massive.
Whoa.
Like I have a big head, and they still look huge next to my head. So those are my recommendations. I hope I didn't give too many.
A lot of knowledge for you.
No, these it's funny because I listened to them all, but they look so nice, and I like being able to go through when I make a video and to find it in the book, so it's a lot easier to do that with the physical copy than
It is actually very cool.
Yeah, and
to
I like having
reading among the people. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I like having mementos, and I like being able to have them in the background of my videos, and they're nice to have, and I learned so much from all of them, so they're valuable.
That sounds really great. So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate that.
No, of course, man. Anytime.
I was Pavel Ruszczak. There was André Dutra. Thank you so much, man. See you later.
Course, man. See you later. Anytime.